Well, I know that a couple of days ago I talked about how that we reap that what we sow, and I really kind of, dug down deep and that pressed hard on that issue because I think it is something that we always have to keep in mind. I pray that God would help it to keep at the front of our mind when we're especially making decisions from moment to moment or for long term. And I think that's really important. But what he says in verse 8 is kind of interesting to me as well. It's kind of along the same lines, but yet it gives a little bit different perspective. He says, the righteous man is rescued from trouble, and it comes on the wicked instead. Now, people argue about, is this an absolute rule? Is this a principle that's always viable? Or is it there just kind of a likelihood or a probability in this? Well, I think it's an absolute personally. I get a little crazy when I hear people talking about, well, that's not a promise, that's a probability. In most cases, 9 out of 10 dentists say, so forth and so on. And I think the problem with that is we really undercut the impact of the statement. We take away its power. Because when he says the righteous man is rescued from trouble, he is giving me a promise that he's going to keep me from being overtaken by troubles. Now, the problem is we identify hardships in this life, even health issues, as being a trouble, and then we think, I'm not supposed to have any trouble in my life. And that's not the case at all. In fact, there are many troubling things that happen to us that are the very means by which God fulfills his plan and his purpose in our life. So having everything go well and exactly the way I want them is not the secret to a best life. In fact, it's overcoming challenges that come to us that really becomes the most rewarding and builds a depth of character and teaches us that happiness and joy and fulfillment are not dependent upon getting my way all the time. Because that's really where we throw our tizzy fits. I want things to go the way I want things to go, and they're not going the way I want them to go. And so therefore I'm missing out on what would make me happy. And yet I've discovered that many of the things I've been able to accomplish did not make me particularly happy. Now, my wife and I have this interesting practice because we pray every morning together before we start our day. And one of the things we pray all the time is, Lord, help us to get through all of the things that we need to get through today. We have this long tick list of things that have to take. Some are just minor things. Some are bigger issues like this. And we pray and say, God, help us to not only accomplish these things, but to do them as well as we can. And when we come to the end of the day and we see that we've actually made significant progress on this list of to-dos, there's a certain satisfaction we feel. But more importantly, we look at each other and saying, God enabled us to do far more than we ever thought we could possibly do. In fact, God guided us through circumstances and situations and challenges, and they turned out so much better than we ever thought they would turn out. And it's been surprising to me. I remember, I don't want to go into too much details, but my wife and I were facing a significant financial challenge regarding our future. And we've been working on it, trying all sorts of different angles of how can I address this and solve this problem and figure this out. And nothing was coming together. And I remember finally, I just said, Lord, I give up. I don't see any way that I can address this. If it's going to address it, it's because you do something, not because I did it. And so I remember interesting because we went to a meeting to talk to somebody about the problem and to basically say, we've tried everything. We can't figure this out. And I basically said, this is what it is. And the guy started asking a few questions. And after 3 or 4 questions, he said, well, why don't you just do this, this, this? And my wife and I looked at each other and said, we didn't even know we could do that. And basically it solved the problem and has been a godsend ever since. But I look back on it going, how much time did I spend tossing and turning at night in bed saying, oh man, I got to fix this thing out before it's too late. And then discovering that God had it covered, that he has my life in his hands, that I thought I was heading for trouble and God rescued me from that trouble. And, I think about so many times I have to have difficult conversations with people. To say the least. We call it the tunnel of chaos. You go in and the room and you talk to somebody and you don't know how it's going to come out. You don't know what the end result is. And I found that praying over and saying, God, guide, direct, and lead and speak and minister and control these dynamics. And it's always been amazing to me how over and again, God just steps in, he takes care, and he does this redemptive thing that we feared would be this terrible, conflictive conversation. And it's something that has a very real and powerful redemptive side of it. Now, there have been some situations where it's really gone south and the person has reacted very negatively, and it hasn't, I couldn't say I put a bow on it and had a happy ending. But I'll tell you what I did have discovered, that even at that, it was God's will. That God used that to really redirect our lives in a way that really made a major difference. It really helped us. That things going wrong and falling apart often are designed by God to free you from things that are really going to, especially in the future, turn out to be an albatross around your neck. And so what he says is, trust me with these details. You don't have an answer. You don't even know how to rescue yourself. You don't know how to even get yourself out of this fix. But if you put your thing on the altar, you lay your life on the altar and say, God, here it is. I surrender to you. You do what you want to do. God will work it out. I remember when I was first in ministry, a young Christian, and there was a guy who he led to the Lord. He had been arrested for selling pot, and he had a trial date coming in the future, and the looked like I was going to have prison time. And so him and 5 or 6 other guys were all arrested all at once, in the same kind of drug conspiracy thing. And we just prayed for him, and just after we led him to Christ, and said, let's just pray that God's will be done. Whatever God has, if he wants you to go to prison, you go to prison. And if he doesn't, that he would release you. And it would just happen that way. And the craziest thing happened. He went to trial, and when all the other guys said, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. When they came to him, he says, are you guilty? He says, I'm guilty. I'm guilty of charge. I did the crime. I'm guilty. I confess. And then they had the whole trial, and they had the testimonies and all this sort of stuff. And finally, the judge was to give sentence or pass judgment, because it was just between the judge and these plaintiffs. And the judge went down the list. I'm giving you this much time in jail, this much time in jail, this much time in jail. And then she comes to this young guy. His name was Roger. I won't give you his last name. And he said nothing. He just skipped over and went to the next guy. And when he got done, the prosecutor said, well, what about that guy? What about Roger? You didn't say anything about him. And the judge hit his gavel down and said, what I said is what I said. I'm done. And he got up and walked out. So here he was. He was guilty, but he had no charge, no sentence, and they just let him walk out of the jail. And the other guys walked off to jail. They let him out of jail. And it was like this. We sat back and said, what happened? Well, it's not fair. He didn't deserve, he didn't get what was fair or just. He got mercy. Mercy that God put into the heart of that judge. Now, I'm not advising that or promising that that's a solution to every kind of situation you find yourself in. But I'm just saying it really spoke to me how powerful God is, how he can inject himself into every situation. He can take somebody like a Joseph who was wrongly accused, imprisoned and enslaved and taken in all these terrible situations for this whole season of his life. And then what happens when God is finished doing whatever work he wants to do in Joseph? He takes him out and he lifts him to the second highest position in the world, because this was the biggest empire in the world at that time. How did he do that? That's not just a myth. That's just a story. That happened in real time to a real person in a very real way. And God's saying he's going to do that to you. He's going to do that for me. That he's going to rescue me from troubles. He said, and the people who are wicked and don't trust me, don't look to me, try to figure it out all on their own and try to buy themselves out of trouble, he says it'll come back on their own head, and they will perish. I think about John Gotti, they called him the Teflon Don. They kept on trying to get him on this thing and that thing, and he'd get away, and he was very cocky and self-satisfied. But one day it caught up with him. It's like they say, the wheels of justice may roll very slowly, but eventually they'll catch up with you. And when they do, they will grind you very finely, as certain former State Department and cabinet members are beginning to experience themselves. The justice catches up with you. But the interesting thing is, not only did Gotti go to jail, he ended up dying in there of cancer. A cancer that would have killed him even if he'd been out of jail. You see, we can't escape the judgment of God. And the judgment of God against sin is death. I'm going to die physically because I'm a sinner. But God says the difference is when I die, my soul and my spirit leave my body, go to be with the Lord, and he will give me a new body that will never die, that's eternal in the heavens. And he'll robe me with robes of greatest righteousness. For the man or woman who doesn't know Jesus, won't submit to him, won't follow his ways, when you die, you're dead. Your soul goes into hell, and there will remain for all of eternity. I pray that if this is a question in your life, that you'd answer it correctly. God bless you and go in your grace.